We are in the middle of chapter 645 in this amazing Kabbalistic text. So please jump in with us. I'm at my office because power is off. And that actually reminds me of one of the teachings that the Alter Rebbe shared with us a few chapters back about making a home for God in the physical world, a home for God in the physical world. He started this whole long series off by saying that when we do a mitzvah, that is so in tune, it's so transparent to what God wants. There's no ego in the way whatsoever, that we become like a chariot for God's will, and we create a home for God's actual essence down here in the physical world, like nothing else. We for a moment, we have a moment where we're like Abraham, we're a chariot for God. But then the Alter Rebbe says, we want to learn how to fill that mitzvah with kavanah, with spiritual emotions. You want to give that mitzvah a soul, so to speak. And he says, yes, you've created a home for God by doing the mitzvah, but if I just take the dollar and put it in the tzedakah box by rote, by habit, with no feeling, with no love, with no reverence, now I've created a home for God, but it's not a home that's filled with light. We want to fill that home with light and joy. And that's by attaching a sense of love and a sense of awe to that physical act, whatever it is. And then the home I've created for God is full of light and joy. So everything, of course, is by divine providence. Today, we had a storm. I'm sure many of my local friends around here are also without power. So I woke up and I went to sleep, and the normal house that's full of light and joy and ease and air conditioning is now dark and overheated and the rest. So just there to remind us, that's what God wants. We're creating all these homes for God by doing physical mitzvahs all over Temple Israel, all over the world. And all we have to do is think a little, as the Alter Rebbe said, and contemplate on topics that will inspire my love and my awe. And those will be the soul of that mitzvah. It'll fill God's home up down here with light, and God will have power back on. It's like we're that power app, and God's waiting for us to say, okay, here's when you'll be hooked up again. And it's so easy to just plug it in. It's just a question of plugging it in. So that's what we're learning. That's what we're learning in these chapters.
Does the temple have power?
Yes, temple has power. That's why I'm here instead of at home.
Okay.
And, also, we have a generator. So,
Oh,
maybe
okay.
there's another muscle in our life that even if we rely on people around us to inspire us, to make us happy and to do Judaism with joy, we should always have a backup generator in case our surroundings let us down one day. We should have our own inner drive that we can just hit the button and we know no matter what, we're going to have a minimum of emotion to raise it up. So thank you. It's also, by the way, Elul. So Eleanor got in touch with this morning saying, make sure we talk about the month of Elul because that's so important and it so touches on what we're learning. Elul, a very, very well-known teaching, is that Elul stands for Ani Ledodi Vedodi Li. That's Aleph, Lamed, Vav, Lamed. I see heads nodding, right? We've learned this before. So the month of Elul, which is the month leading up to Rosh Hashanah, it's the month when we sit back, we look at a year and we say, oi, right? I had all these plans to be a better person. I had all these plans to learn this much and do this much and help this much and give this much tzedakah. And I'm looking back and if you're like me, if you're human, there's a lot of oy veys and a lot of, I didn't quite measure ups and a lot of maybe ways where we cut ourselves off from our highest self. So this month is about reconnecting with the infinite, reconnecting with God and saying, I am for my beloved and my beloved is for me. Ani ledodi vedodi li, right? This month is all about just reestablishing that loving relationship, just like perhaps a dispute in a marriage that's gone too far and you're on opposite sides of the house, on opposite sides of the bed, and you're trying to reach across and you finally do, and you have that spark and that reconnection and that flow of emotion, and it's more powerful than before. It's the same now with us and with God. And so this class and learning and finding people you've wronged and apologizing to them, that's all part of this month. Of course, we also listen to the shofar every day in preparation for Rosh Hashanah. How do we say this? I was talking to a young person who was in Israel. She was actually on the first trip back in Israel of the world, the first organized trip since COVID. Amazing, BBYO. I was talking to her about all the wonderful things and friends she made. It was a beautiful trip. But she said, we got there, we went to the hotel, we were in quarantine, we were all tested. It was so stressful. And then as soon as we were done, what do? We went straight to the kotel. And how did I feel at the kotel? She said, nothing. I felt underwhelmed. I felt like this is the kotel and there's just a few people here and they don't look like me and they don't pray like me. And the whole thing was dry. It meant nothing. I said, did you go back later in the trip? She said, yeah. I said, how did it feel then? She's like, yeah, then it felt much better. Like I had a rich experience. And if you've been to Israel, these adjustments, these reconnections, they actually take a little bit of time of processing. In my experience, it's about day 3 in Israel when people realize what Israel is. That's another class. But the same thing with the shofar. If you want to show up on Rosh Hashanah and hear the shofar and have it, in a few blasts, just suddenly transform your whole being, you may wind up a little bit like my friend at the Kotel who just, stumbled out of the hotel, saw this wall, and her system didn't have time to raise itself up, to recalibrate to the new spiritual reality. So same thing with shofar. It's important to hear it through the entire month. I'm not going to blow it online because really hearing it online does not do the trick. You want to be in person. So come find me if you need it. I'm here all day. Happy to blow the shofar for anyone. But hearing it every day, it's like taking that time to recalibrate my system. So on Rosh Hashanah, when I hear it, that'll reach down right to the bottom of my soul and wake me up and make sure that I'm ready to set myself up to make the same mistakes next year as this year, right? But at least set myself up to reconnect with God. So any thoughts about that or questions before we dive into the text? I know it's a bit of an introduction. Yeah, and let me, before we start, let me open up Facebook Online. If you're with us online, welcome. Feel free to ask questions online. I will try and include those in the conversation. Comments go here. So I'm watching you guys, and let me know whoever's with us online. So we're in the Tanya. Let's jump right in because I've been doing a long introduction. We're at 6:45. ולגבי משה דהיינו לגבי בחינת הדת שבכל נפש מישראל האלוקית מילתא זוטטרי היא כנזכר לאל.
As it applies to Moses, that is to say, in relation to the quality of dots that is in the divine soul of every Jew, this quality being the quality Moses found within you, within each Jewish soul. This is indeed a minor thing, as it has been stated above, that when a Jew reflects with his dots upon the matters that arose fear of God, he will surely succeed in attaining it.
So this chapter is talking about the first wing rather of kavanah, of spiritual intention, which is awe. I'm going to even introduce a new word for yira to our class. We're going to call it today inhibition. Inhibition. Because at the beginning of this chapter, the Alter Rebbe said, Moshe said, all God asks of you is to fear God. That's all, nothing much. Which leads to the question, isn't fear of God a difficult thing? How can I just fearing God? Isn't that tricky? How is it just all you have to do? The Gemara answered, for Moshe, it was a small thing. And then of course we asked, but I'm not Moshe. Moshe is talking to me. How is it a small thing for me? So the Alter Rebbe went through and showed us each one of us is able to plug into a mini Moshe that's inside us that provides us with awe. Also, we can connect to tzaddikim in our generation. That's a second piece. And then third, we have tools to work on ourselves. We want to de-emphasize my physical drives, right? I mean, how important is this cup of coffee in the morning versus how important is it for me to get up and do a prayer service or learn some Torah, right? Coffee can go down. Prayer and Torah can go up. Helping my friends can go up. And finally, we want to learn, as we've learned, to meditate, but meditating, focusing on this quality of da'at, which knowledge in our context means connecting to information, connecting to an abstract idea so I get emotions. So if I learn that I can plug into my mini Moshe and that I can step back from my physical drives and I can sit and meditate on God's greatness, just to the extent that I feel a sense of yira, of inhibition, then it is an easy thing. And in fact, as we've learned, it can completely control my thought, speech, and action, my behavior. And it can also elevate my Torah mitzvahs to great heights in terms of my spiritual work. And in this conversation, I'm summing up the chapter. So if it's a little cloudy, perhaps look back at the last couple of classes too. Yochanan ben Zakkai said, as he was dying and he was blessing his greatest disciples, his greatest blessing he could give them was, I bless you that you should have the same fear of God as you do when an ordinary pedestrian is watching you, right? When you're just in a crowd of people, of normal people, you should fear God that much. And they said, that's your blessing, that we should only fear God like I fear the milkman or a child going to school? And this great sage said, if only you had that level of fear, if only we could have that level of fear. Because what is that level? When the UPS delivery person rings my doorbell and opens the door, I'm not yelling at anyone suddenly. I'm not eating from the fridge without putting it on a plate. I'm not whatever I might do when I'm alone. Suddenly, I can control myself. It's simple inhibition. And so if we could have that sense that God is always watching us, and at least have as much inhibition as when a person was watching us, that is this lower level of fear that the Alter Rebbe is talking about. Yira tata. We'll get into higher level of fear later. And that, to answer this question, yes, is an easy thing. That's all God asks of us. So all we have to do is meditate for a minimum amount of time for ourselves to create this inhibition type of yira. And that will be there when I'm on my own and I'm supposed to be learning, but instead I want to pick up my phone and go to Facebook. You know what? If someone was watching me knowing I'm supposed to learn, I wouldn't put the book down, right? If I was in a room full of people, I wouldn't put the book down. So now when I'm in the room with God, I should at least be that inhibited. I should have that much yira. Shehadat hu ha-mekasher matzpune binat halev el b'chinat gilui b'machashava mamash kayedua lenodea leyodeichen. Go ahead, Doreen.
For dat is the faculty which connects the hidden understanding of the heart with revelation in actual thought, as is known to the students of the Kabbalah. As mentioned earlier, all Jews possess hidden treasure of fear of heaven in their hearts. Through the faculty of dat, this fear of heaven is revealed and felt in one's thought and also affects his speech and actions.
So this, as we said, when you're looking at the sfirot and the emotional attributes that develop out of them in our consciousness, seichel, intellect, is chokhmah, bina, and dat, which is inspiration, any cogitation, then dat, which takes this intellectual flow and connects it to me so I can develop feelings out of it. Right? If I think about golf 14 hours a day, I'm going to get passionate about golf, and someone mentions a tournament, bang, my sense of love is flowing. I love watching it. I love talking about it. I want to know who's playing, right? And also my sense of yira, right? I want to have the right golf clubs. If I have a bad golf club, I'm not going to play with it. Oh, if my swing is off, I'm going to practice because I don't want to have a bad swing. I want to guard my own game, right? And if something comes up during the game, hold on, I want to push that off my schedule to make sure I have room, right? My sense of gvura is also going to be there. So if we think about God's greatness, then we're going to develop the same feelings, but about this abstract concept that God is everything. But there's still the problem, right? So we've recognized that God is looking at us all the time, and that if I can internalize that and relate to that, that will at least give me this lowest level of yira, which we're calling inhibition. Like someone's watching me, is it a person, is it God, whatever. As long as someone's watching me, I'm going to control my behavior at a minimum level. But the problem is I'm looking around and I'm not seeing God. I mean, I know God's everything. If you ask a 6-year-old, is God, is God in this binder over there? They say, yeah, of course, God's everywhere. God's in the binder, right? Is God in my friend? Yes, God's in my friend. But I'm used to relating to things that I see. and that I hear. My whole life, the more I see and hear things, the more I relate to them, the more real they seem. And now I'm going the opposite. I'm taking something abstract that you can't see, you can't hear, and I'm saying, make that as real as something that I see and hear, so I have feelings about it. So how do I overcome that? Now the Alter Rebbe is going to give us a beautiful meditation and approach that'll help if we feel like that's a barrier, that it's not as real to me as a car coming down the street. Whoa, I don't walk in front of the car, no question. But if I know that God says, don't tell stories about your friends, is that as real to me as the car coming down the street? If I'm tempted to tell that story, have I contemplated God enough so that I'm looking at and I see the reality of that piece of the Torah, and it'll stop me from telling the story? That's what we want. So I think you'll love this. ועוד זאת יזכור כי כמו שבמלך בשר ודם עיקר היראה היא מפנימיותו מחיותו ולא מגופו, שהרי כשישן אין שום יראה ממנו. Paula, do you want to go ahead and unmute for us?
In addition to this, one should remember that, as in the case of a mortal king, the fear of him relates mainly to his inner essence and vitality and not to his body. For when he is asleep, though his body does not change, there is no fear of him.
Right, so interesting mashal, interesting metaphor here. And we don't have kings, so I know this is it's not as evident and obvious as in the time of the Alter Rebbe. In fact, one of the big Hasidim of the Alter Rebbe, or maybe it was the Mittler Rebbe, when the last Tsar was killed, and basically, you know, the socialist revolution happened, they were no friend of the Tsar. The Tsar had not been kind to the Jews, but he said, you know, even though the Tsar was not our friend, it's a pity, because now when I'm teaching children about awe of the king, there's no mashal, there's no example of having fear of a king on earth anymore. Because in his lifetime, when he was teaching kids, he just had to say, you know, a child would ask, what does it mean to have yira of Hashem? What does it mean to have yira of God? And he'd say, well, how do you feel when you think about the Tsar? And suddenly that was all. That's all they needed, right? So there's something, you know, these rulers in these times had such authority. They were there's something else going on. It's not like now with democracy where they come and shake our hands and have coffee with people and worry about the polls and are they going to get reelected, right? I mean, we don't really have what they had then. But anyways, imagine, you know, what you can of whether you traveled with us to Morocco and we're under the authority of a king there, or if you've been to Jordan and there's a king there. You know, my brother-in-law is living in Thailand. And if you say anything critical of the king in Thailand, you go to jail for life, without exaggeration, right? Anything critical that you say publicly, you go to jail for life. So no one says anything bad about the king. So that's what a king is, right? That's what that kind of ruler is. And even if you have this great fear of the king, it's not the king's physical body that you're seeing that you fear, right? It's not the part that you see and the part that you hear that you fear, it's something else. Even in the case of a human king, if the king was asleep and you knew the king wasn't going to wake up, you know, the king was under anesthesia and there was no chance the king would wake up, and you're standing right in front of the king, you could say whatever you want in that case, right? Because you're not really afraid of the part of the king you can see. You're afraid of the king's soul, the king's essence. You're afraid of the king's intellect and emotions that are animating that physical body. And if the king's awake, I'm going to guard my tongue, but if the king's asleep and no one else is around, that guy's whatever, right? I'm free of fear. So what is that we fear? Not the visible part of the king. We fear, even in that case, the invisible part of the king. And if we can relate to that, we can understand we're always in fear of invisible things anyways. We always have, call it reverence or awe or inhibition because of the invisible aspects of the world. And if we can just connect the dots to God, we can use that same fear we have of a police officer or of anything with authority in the world and transfer that because it's a natural feeling. Go ahead, Linda, if you want to unmute for us.
And surely his inner essence and vitality are not perceived by physical eyes, but only by the mind's eye.
Right, so we are related to each other. We know each other. But when I think of who you are, I don't think of your physical being. Yeah, I relate that to who you are, but I think of your intellect. I think of your emotions. I think of your spirit, the essence of who you are. That I can only see anyways with my mind's eye. And that's what we love and fear about a person, obviously. Not to bring up sad subjects, but I've officiated many funerals, and the physical part of the person is still there. And yet we're saying, so-and-so was so amazing, we'll miss so-and-so, right? Don't want to dwell on it, but we know the physical being, that's not the person. My love and my awe that I'm inspired by the person is not about what I see in here anyways. It's all about what the mind's eye is able to see in any case. So that is how the Alter Rebbe suggests we relate to God. And then God will be as real as anything we see that we fear or that we love in the physical world. Questions about this? It's not so complicated, but I find it really, really enlightening. Let's go on. Rick, we can't hear whatever's going on there because you're muted. Oh, you're going to unmute yourself. Got it. Al yedei riyat enei vasar begufo ulevushav sheyodea shechayuto melubash betocham. Through
the physical eyes, beholding his body and garments, and knowing that his vitality is clothed in them.
Right, so what am I in awe of? Not of the king's physical garments, the king's body, the king's voice. I fear the king's invisible vitality that's enclosed in them, and that's when the king's asleep. Now I can jump around, do whatever I want, do somersaults. As soon as the king opens his eyes and wakes up, oh, now I'm back to good behavior. Only thing that's changed is that invisible essence is now back. So what I'm afraid of? I'm afraid of the invisible anyways, just like with God. V'im ken, we'll do to kacha mamash yesh lo li'ro et Hashem al yedei riyat einei vasar b'shamayim v'aretz v'chol tzva'am asher or ein sof baruch hu melubash behem lahachayotam.
And if this is so, then surely in the analog as well, not only is the king seeing him, but he is seeing the king as well. And this causes him to fear God moreover.
Go ahead, he must.
To fear God. Moreover, he must truly likewise fear God when gazing with his physical eyes at the heavens and earth and all the hosts, wherein is closed the infinite light of the blessed Ein Sof that animates them.
So now we're going to go into a second piece, and it maybe feels poetic to us. I think this might have felt more potent or real or something to people before they had satellites in space and space stations and telescopes that could see across the universe. I don't know, but I still love it. So let's go through it quickly. V'imnere b'riyat ha'ayin shehem betelim le'oro yitbarech b'hishtachavatam kol yom klipe ma'arav b'ishkiyatam k'amar b'tenu zechanam nevracha al pasuk utzva shemayim lecha mishtachavim shehashchina b'ma'ara.
And it is also seen with a glance of the eye that they are nullified to his blessed light by the fact that they prostrate themselves every day toward the west at the time of their setting. As the rabbis of blessed memory commented on the verse, and the hosts of the heavens bow before you, and that the Shekinah abides in the west.
So the Holy of Holies was on the west side of the temple. So the Shekhinah abides on the west. We face east because that's where Jerusalem is regards to us, but it's said that the Shekhinah is in the west. And when you look at the heavens, and if you can put your mind back to the best science of the day and how really the worldview was, they saw the heavenly bodies as sort of beings that were circling the earth, and they were always coming from the east and then crossing the sky and then bowing down towards the west. These great celestial bodies that never went away, that lived through whole generations and civilizations. They all didn't stand still. They feared God so much that as they moved, they all traveled towards God's presence in the west, the Shekhinah, and they all bowed down and even vanished and nullified themselves before God's presence. So, maybe now that we've been, out and seen, Saturn's planets and stuff, Saturn's satellites, we're a little more jaded about it. But I like this. I like, if you see, it's like one of these action movies, right? When they want to introduce a real tough hero, what do? They always introduce someone else first, who looks like the toughest guy you could possibly imagine, or woman, right? And you go into some bar and there's like the big tough guy in the bar, and they start beating everybody up and threatening everybody. And only then, when they've established how tough this guy is, now the star comes in, and the star is even tougher than this guy. So, you can tell by the toughness of the foil of the supporting character how tough the main character is. And same thing here. We know the sun is has power over the world to give life and to bring vegetation. We know the moon pulls the oceans with its strength and lights up the night. We see these stars never moving in the sky, and yet, as powerful as they are, they're bowing to this invisible being, God. And so if I walk in and I see all these powerful beings themselves going, oh, I'm so in awe, I'm going to bow down before the Shekhinah, how does that make me feel about God? I should feel very small. I should feel a sense of yira, that I contract, and that I get out of the way, and then there's really only God, and that I follow God's plan. ונמצא הילוכם כל היום כלפי מערב הוא דרך השתחוואה וביטול. Hence, I think what Ruth?
Hold on.
Yeah, so we're hence not only.
Hence, not only do the heavenly hosts show their self-abnegation when they set in the west, but their daily orbit westward is a kind of prostration and self-nullification. It's interesting.
Yeah. והנה גם מי שלא ראה את המלך מעולם, ואינו מכירו כלל אף על פי כן כשנכנס לחצר המלך.
Me?
Cindy, go ahead.
Okay. Even when he who has never seen the king and does not recognize him at all, nevertheless, when he enters the royal court.
Oh, sorry, Sharon, you're invisible, so I have to learn how to be sensitive to the invisible here. Sharon, do you want to read next? Are you with us? You want to let me know? ורואה שרים רבים ונכבדים משתחווים לשפט. Hey, go ahead, and please.
Are we at even he?
No, one down, and sees.
Okay, and sees many eminent nobles prostrating themselves before one man.
Stay with me, one more. Tipol alav ema v'fachet. Go ahead, Sharon.
So too, the self-nullification before God shown by the awesome creatures, such as the heavenly bodies, enables one to be in fear and awe of him.
Right, so there falls on him a dread and an awe. So yes, we don't see God. God's not visible to us. We only have an abstract sense of God and emotions for meditating. But someone else also who's never seen the king, if they happen to get a chance to walk into the chambers of the king, and they see, the mayor that they have awe and respect for, and they see the governor they awe and respect for, and they see all these ministers, every one of these great noble people and wealthy people and knowledgeable people and wise people, and they see all of them going, oh, that man, oh, bowing down, or that woman, oh, I'm bowing down. Even if this person's never seen the king and doesn't realize the qualities of the king, by seeing everyone else that's so great bowing down, they'll be filled with awe anyways, for someone they've never seen. And so same with us, although we've never seen God, God's essence is outside of visible sight, because the whole physical world is also prostrating, as it were, then we can also transfer that. And I think the same thing is true in a broader sense. We often, as I'll get to now, we often don't see the actual cause of something. We only see the physical effect of something, and yet we can relate very directly to the cause, right? Like take gravity, for instance. None of us have seen gravity, right? From Newton's time, the apple fell on his proverbial head and he said, aha. But even Newton to now, no one has actually seen gravity. We try to have equations and theories about it, but it's an invisible force. All we see is the effect of gravity, right? We see that. But that's not gravity. That's gravity's clothing. That's the effect of gravity. And yet, we have no trouble having fear of gravity, something invisible, right? I get up on I go to Club Med. It's not my thing, but I go there and I get on the trapeze and, right? Why am I so scared that there's space below me and I'm not scared that there's space above me, right? Why does this space not terrify me and that space down there terrifies me? It makes no sense. I've never seen gravity, but because I've seen the effects of gravity all the time, I have no trouble having awe and respect for gravity. It's the exact same thing for God. What we're seeing around us, if we can connect the dots, is actually God's power and God's reality and God's creative speech as much as this is the effect of gravity. And so if I can recognize that the whole physical world is there only because of God's reality and God's speech and God's will, and I'm just seeing the effect of it, okay, but that's okay. I see the effect of gravity. I'm still terrified of heights, perhaps, and certainly have respect for them. So we should do the same thing, just like, we don't see electricity, but I see there's light in the room. I know the power of electricity. I know when it's off, it's a problem. I know gravity that I don't see has effects. And so when I see the effects of God's essence, of God's will, I can also have the same respect for that invisible force, even though I'm only seeing the physical garments of it, as we'll see. And although, I think, is it Doreen now? Yeah.
And although many garments are involved in this vestiture, so that when one gazes at created beings, one does not perceive that they are but garments to their divine life force. There is no difference or distinction at all in the fear of a mortal king, whether he be naked or clothed in one or many garments.
Right. Hare ein hevdel v'hefresh klal b'yirat melech basar v'dam ben shu arom uven shehu lavush echad ben shu lavush b'levushim rabim. Right. So there may be many levels, many garments, as we're saying. Right. It may be the effects of gravity, because gravity is gonna bring God forbid, a wall down on something. And then that wall is going to crush the thing. So there's the gravity, and then there's the actual object itself, right? Or find your own example where there's many layers, but still, I'm going to have respect for gravity. I'm not going to build a house without proper foundations and beams that can hold itself up, because I'm aware that even if there's 3 steps involved, I don't want the house to collapse, right? I'm aware of the stages in electricity, right? If there's a down power line, and there's some water, I'm not going to touch the water, even though, okay, the power has to go from the line and then into the water and then to me. I don't care how many stages it takes. I have respect for it. I'm not going to touch anything, right? And the same thing with God. Yes, God creates spiritual worlds, and then those spiritual worlds have lower levels and create other worlds and other worlds and other worlds. And by the time we get to the physical world, there's infinite levels. And I'm looking at God's garments, but I'm looking at just the physical shell of this infinite system of creation. And so I could say to myself, well, yeah, this is just the physical world. Why should I have awe of God from the physical world? Well, if I'm looking at the king and it's the winter and the king is dressed up in a fur coat on top of a suit, on top of a shirt, on top of an undershirt, etc., am I going to say, why should I fear the king? I'm just looking at a fur coat, right? If it was just a suit, now, okay, I'd have fear of the king. Makes no difference. I don't care how much clothing the king is wearing. I'm not saying anything that's going to get me in trouble. I'm at my best behavior. A king is a king, right? And even if I happen to, in an emergency, the king runs out of the palace wearing only undergarments, I still have fear of the king. And I don't get confused because there's fewer or more garments. So same thing with the physical world. Just because it's physical and it's so removed from God's essence, that shouldn't confuse us, just like seeing a king wearing a fur coat does not confuse us. And this is actually we get now to one of the key sections that many people actually memorize. And in fact, this section is in our prayer book. Sorry, I didn't prepare myself to tell you the page, but we included this when we wrote Temple Israel's prayer book. This quote is in Temple Israel's prayer book as one of the readings that we read. You'll probably recognize it. I love it. Ela ha'ikar hu hargil. Hargil dato machshato tamid liot kavua bilibo umocho tamid. I think we're at Rick. Is it you? I lost track. Are we at Paula, Linda, or Rick? I think we're at Paula. Sorry, Paula, go ahead.
Oh,
Yeah.
Trying to remember, is it the essential
649,
thing?
the essential thing.
The essential thing, however, is the training to habituate one's mind and thought continuously so that it is always remain imprinted in his heart and mind.
So there's a few phrases the Alter Rebbe uses that make me sit back and say, okay, I want to take time with this page and this thought. When he says, that is the whole essence of man. That is the whole meaning. That is the whole of humankind. Say, okay, I'm going to take this one and make it into a poster for my fridge or, a sticky note for my brain. And also when he says, Ela ha'ikar, ikar means that's the core. That's the essence. That's, when you get a steak at a restaurant, that's the ikar. You get the steak and they might put, greens on top and potatoes on the side and some fries or a salad and a soup, whatever you get. But what are you ordering? You're ordering a steak. Like that's the ikar. And the rest is just fixings, right? So when he says Ela ha'ikar, he means this is the thing. This is the core. Is to habituate your mind, and not your mind, but your thought also continuously, so that it always remains imprinted both in your heart and in your mind. So that's dad. It's not enough for me to know this intellectually. I have to habituate my mind and even think about it consciously so that my mind gets fixed on it. So that's my lens, how my intellect sees. That's my lens, how my heart feels. That the world is not just physical stuff, but that the world is a conversation with God. It's God talking to me. It's God looking at me. It's God searching my guts and my heart and my mind to see, am I meeting the challenge that God is designing for me at every time? And you can think about that, and 10 minutes later, you can be back in my own Narishkeit, right? And having an argument or yelling at somebody or getting frustrated or being angry or being upset. And I'm still here. I'm still having a conversation with God, but I haven't habituated myself. So I just slide off. I go into automatic. I forget. So that's the ikar. That's the core. Now that we know this, now that we know that really God's always watching us, that really there's only God here, the only thing that's keeping me from behaving that way and having that inhibition all the time is just a sense of continuous habit of that being my normal. And that takes repetition. And neuroplasticity is now catching up with exactly this, right? This is a statement of neuroplasticity. This is a statement that says, my mind is not a piece of putty. My mind is like a river. And so I have to keep redirecting the river. And every time I do, it changes. Every time I change my thought, I say, what I perceive as a frustrating scenario is actually still just one being having a conversation with this non-existent entity called Michael. And I'm supposed to, try and do my part and live up to that interaction, that God's paying attention to me, and just do the right thing. And every time I switch and I remind myself, I change my whole brain. I change my whole brain actually, because the brain is neuroplastic, and it's not like you gotta pound on it for 10 years for it to shift. It shifts immediately, and that's what the Alter Rebbe is telling us. Asher kol ma sheroeh hashamayim v'aretz molo hakol hem levushim hachitzonim shel hamelech hakadosh baruch hu. That everything. It's Linda, I think we're at you. And if you want to unmute.
That everything one sees with his eyes, the heavens and earth and all they contain, constitutes the outer garments of the King, the Holy One, blessed be he.
So same thing. Yeah, I don't see gravity. But every time I walk around and my feet stick on the ground, I'm seeing the garments of gravity. Every time I see something rolling down a hill, I see the garments of gravity. Every time I see rain coming down or a tree, I see the garments of gravity. And so I constantly remember that, right? If I throw a rock up in the air, I don't forget about it and say, good, now it's going that way, not my problem. I say, oh, I've seen this before. I know there's garments of gravity. That thing is coming back down. I keep my eye on it. I keep my head out of the way, right? I'm watchful. So if I habituate myself in the same way, I'm going to see the garments of God in everything, and certainly in every person, certainly in every Jewish person, no matter what our feelings about each other. I'm going to see you're a garment of God and you're infinitely valuable, like every creation, but especially, you know, us in the Jewish community with each other. And I'm going to have different feelings because I'm always going to be dealing with God's garments. We did to the bottom, and this way we'll constantly remember. In
this way, he will constantly remember their inwardness and vitality, which is godliness. This will create within him a fear of God.
Right, so that is really an art. And as we'll see, the word emunah, faith, which this is all about, right? It's fine when the world is lovely and I'm looking at a gorgeous flower blossoming or a new baby and I say, this is godly. But let's face it, when I'm looking at a flat tire and I'm cursing the world for getting in my way and I'm saying my version of today is better than God's version of today, now I could use a little bit of this, and I want to keep habituating myself and saying, thank God I got a flat tire. Let's see why. Let's see what God has in mind. Whether the tow truck person desperately needed $150 to tow me, and now I'm making his day, and I'm going to appreciate that's why I'm there, or whether something else is going on. If I keep my eyes open to this perspective, then that will be my feelings and my reality. But emunah actually comes from the same word as artisan. It's amazing. An artisan is an uman, and how do you become an artist? How do you become a craftsman? If I want to learn how to make ice sculptures, I don't just show up with a block of ice one day and read a book and show up and say, okay, now I know how, and chick, 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 chick. No, for years and years, I practice and use different tools until finally I can take a block of ice and I can see something and my hands will just go through it smoothly and every detail will come out. And to do that takes the same repetition. To learn piano or any instrument, it takes running through the scales for years and years and years and running through the figures and the patterns and the chords until finally just music comes through and you've made yourself into a craftsman. That is always a process of repetition, repetition, repetition. Right? It's iterative, repeating. So this word for artisan, uman, and the word for faith, emunah, they both come from the same principle, which is the ikar is all about, the core is all about constant habituation, constant repetition. And in this case, I'm not learning to play the piano, I'm learning to play faith. But it takes constant repetition. I wake up in the morning and I say, Moda ani lefanecha, right? I'm here, I'm thankful to God, and this is a day that is part of God, right? And then I have a prayer practice perhaps. And then my first frustration comes, power's not on yet, right? Says that we repaired it, but hold on, hit number 2, there's no power yet, right? Thank God, there's no power, right? Instead of being frustrated, I want to realign myself to be seeing God's garments all the time and to be in a state of gratitude. And the more I do that, the more the sense of faith becomes who I am and how I feel. Let's do that inside. We've got just a little bit left. Let's see if we can wrap. Let's see. וזה נכלל גם כן בלשון אמונה, שהוא לשון רגילות שמרגיל האדם את עצמו כמו אומן המאמן ידיו וכו'.
This is also, is that where we are?
Yeah.
This is also implicit in the word emunah, faith, which is a term indicating training to which a person habituates himself, like a craftsman who trains his hands and so forth.
Yeah, and so many of us, I often have this conversation, especially with young people. I don't believe in God. And then they give me a rationalization why they don't believe in God. You can't prove that God exists. Of course I can't, right? I've never seen God, neither have I. This idea, that there's a king floating around in space that's, making miracles is so immature. Of course, it's immature. That's just poetic language, etc., etc. But if you chunk up, what is it that they're expressing? They're expressing that they believe faith is a question of intellectual proof. If I think it through and I come to a conclusion, now I can have faith because I've given proof. So they're using the scientific method, so to speak, to try and deal with faith, emunah. But every religious, well, I won't say that, but Kabbalah believes for sure no one can prove to you that God exists. And I would never argue with someone that says you can't prove God exists. Right, I can't. You can't prove God exists or doesn't exist. What emunah is habituating yourself to the axiom that God exists. An axiom is an unprovable supposition, right? So we are taking the axiom that God exists, and we are now inserting it into our perception of the world as regularly as possible. And by doing that, I am developing emunah, faith, because emunah is not something that comes out of scientific method and intellectual calculations and coming to a conclusion, and then I'm with it. And now I can have faith because I proved it to myself. Emunah is actually just something you habituate yourself as if you were learning to play the piano. So if a young person said to me, I don't play the piano because I don't believe in pianos. Okay, I know you don't believe in pianos, but I mean, you don't play the piano because you haven't practiced piano. If you've been practicing piano from the age of 3, now you play piano, you'd probably have different feelings about it too, right? And you'd love making beautiful music, but you don't have an experience of that because you haven't practiced it, right? So I invite you to take on this definition and really look at faith and emunah as something that we practice and something that we do throughout the day to build this sense of being an uman, of being an artisan, and seeing God's garments and everything. And that is really the core of how we just have this lower level of fear, this sense of inhibition just automatically. I'm gonna lower past a basic minimum standard. I'm gonna set my minimum standards, and no matter what happens, when I hit that, I'm just not gonna go past it because someone's watching me and I just wouldn't. I'm inhibited. That's all we need to really begin this incredible flight of spiritual progress.
When I practice and I play the piano, I never think in terms of making music. Thinking, oh yeah, I got to get this practice right. And most of the things that I practice, exercises and finger stuff and whatever, a lot of people wouldn't even consider it to be music.
Yeah, but what we know the satisfaction that comes out of now being able to play a scale. Now it's easier. Now it's smooth, right? And of course, when my son plays a beautiful Mozart piece, that's music to my ears, literally. Let's finish with a quick meditation. Just take a few minutes. So if you're with us, thanks for being here. Find yourself in a comfortable position, seated or lying. Walking around is good too. Let's deepen our breathing. And let any of the cares of the day just fall away. Just picture yourself as a tree in the fall, and all these leaves that are unnecessary, they just fall down and just start becoming earth around me that will nourish me rather than being weight on me. Just let them go. Maybe half the leaves have fallen off. Let the rest of them flutter down just easily. They just detach. They just break off of their own accord. There's 1 or 2 left. Now a breeze comes by and blows those, and now we're just ourselves, just free of that whole outside stress. Let the breath flow and open up into 4 stages. We're going to count 4 counts for each stage. First breathing in, then keeping the breath in, then breathing out, and keeping ourselves empty. So 4 counts for each, starting with in, 2, 3, 4. Keep that breath in, 2, 3, 4. Back out, 2, 3, 4, and stay empty. 2, Starting over, breathing in. 3, 4, keep it full. 2, 3, 4, back out. 2, 3, 4, staying empty. Continue the cycle on your own, breathing through your nose if that's comfortable. Pay no attention to the sounds. We're testing the system here. And the next time we come to the in-breath, the space between the end of the in-breath and the beginning of the out-breath will be our wisdom gateway. Just let that wisdom gateway open up. Space between the end of the in-breath and the beginning of the out-breath is our wisdom gateway. Should be quite a customary thing now to let that open up, however it appears to you in your inner mind's eye. Now we'll place our divine concept in that wisdom gateway. This meditation, God's essence fills the entire physical universe, the whole spiritual universe, and is focused right on me. Focused right on me as if God is standing right here, right in front of me, watching everything I'm thinking, feeling, doing. And in your wisdom gateway, have that meditation, however it appears, in bright colors. Involve yourself, have it be moving, have sounds. So perhaps you have the sense that God is indeed right here, watching your mind, your heart, your deepest instincts. And just see if there's some sense of emotional inhibition that flows out of it. That is yiratata, that is the lower level fear. And just stay with that meditation. Let it fill your mind. Let it deepen in your mind. And be aware of that emotional flow. Let that become something familiar. It's a tool. As we said, if you're trying to do a dot meditation, you can stay here for 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes, simply to make this more of a habit, simply to make this more ingrained so that the anchor emotionally is more firm. If you're here in the class, we're at the class end, so let's open our eyes and wiggle our fingers and toes. It's always nice to open my eyes and see that the internet is still streaming, you're still here. So thanks everyone for joining us. This is User's Guide for the Soul. I hope you've enjoyed our journey through the Tanya so far. If you'd like to join the class, we're always happy to welcome new students. Email maya@temple-israel.org. That's MAYA@temple-israel.org. And wishing you an amazing, amazing Shabbat, and see you soon.